Welcome to Show Me Sports Legacies. Tonight, we are going to take a deep plunge into the world of Trenton Bulldog Wrestling. Our guests tonight represent two-thirds of an amazing run over the last 50 years out of the 60 years of the Trenton wrestling program, a run that mirrors the stability of the Pittsburgh Steelers in its leadership with three coaches over a 50-year period, beginning with the hiring of Ron Hurst in 1974, the promotion of assistant Bill Hill in 2001 upon Ron's retirement. He followed that up with an 11-year run. Charlie Bacon was his assistant and then promoted to head coach in the year 2012 and is running the program to this day. So we are all the way from 1974 to the current day. That's it, folks. Three coaches in 50 years of Trenton wrestling. The legacy of each of these coaches is secure, reflected medalists, champions, and the family connection so apparent in the program for half a century. Our panelists on the podcast tonight are my co-host, former coach and athletic director Chris Ockenfels, and original panelist and current R9 superintendent, Daniel Gott. Okay, fellas, I haven't turned on Ron and Charlie's mics yet. This may be your last chance. Dive in here. What are we talking about, and what's the first thing you thought coming into the studio tonight?
Well, first thing for me is we love to do Mount Rushmores on our podcast and just here and there. And what comes to mind is when I came to Trenton, knowing that Ron Hurst and his legacy was on the Mount Rushmore of Trenton sports. There's just not that many figures over the long haul that have had such meaning, such passion, such a following that Ron did for his wrestling program. And coming in as a young AD was a great example to follow how to build a program, how to sustain a program, how to get athletes interested. And then also the current coach, who I had as one of my former students, and watching him grow, watching him take over. It's just been a great run that I've got to be a part of, and just standing back and watching, but also enjoying what they've done for Trenton wrestling. So good stuff.
Yeah, for me, this is an episode that I'm happy to be a part of, mostly because I've known Charlie since we were just wee little lads, and he's my connection really to the sport. And it's a sport that I've grown to love and follow over the years. Simply starting by following him as he was going through it. And, you know, Trenton's had a lot of strong legacies when it comes to sports and successful programs, but I think you would be hard-pressed to argue against that wrestling from top to bottom, from start to finish, is quite possibly the most successful sports program in Trenton history. If you look back at not only the individual accomplishments, but the team accomplishments, and Coach Hurst is the one who built that legacy. And then we've been lucky enough to have men like Bill Hill and then, of course, Charlie now take that on. And it's something I can say as a district we're extremely proud of. And it's just been really fun to watch. And if you still go to a wrestling match, there are people who've been connected to this sport for 10, 20, 30 years who still show up. You still see Nick McCarg in those ridiculous overalls walking in to watch. I mean, you still see the same fans that have been coming for years because their kids were doing it. And, you know, we have an impressive list on the wall in the wrestling room of former state champions. But what's not on that wall are all the runner-ups and all the third place finishers and all the fourth place medalists. And it's just been an incredibly successful program, and it's continued to this day. And man, it's just something that's been a blast to watch.
Well, we'll talk about some of these numbers. So in 1974, Coach Hurst took over. I think your first state champion was in 1980. Yes, that's right. With Steve Marley, he won the heavyweight title. During a 27-year run, he had 9 state champs, 10 runner-ups, 132 state qualifiers. And beginning in 1986, and this is like Andy Reid stuff here, okay? We're talking 12 straight years of district titles from 86 through 1998 and unbeaten in dual meets. In a 3-year stretch in the 1990s, he had teams that finished second 2 consecutive years at the state meet and third in the third year. Several awards and achievements we'll talk about later in the episode. Welcome to Show Me Sports Legacies, Coach Hurst. So in the first year of Coach Hill's legacy then, Charlie Bacon shows up and becomes a state medalist. Later returns as an assistant coach. He has had 11 different medalists during his tenure, total of 17 medals and 1 state champ in 2023 with Sam Gibson. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Jeff. We appreciate being here, and I enjoy listening to all of your previous episodes.
He probably won't mention it, but one thing to add to that resume, he was also named the assistant coach of the year for the state of Missouri. And what year was that? I can't remember. It was like maybe your second year with
Maybe the
Bill,
second
first or
year.
with Bill.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Not bad.
we didn't, not bad.
Bad at all.
Not bad.
And considering that you grew up with Daniel, I mean, you've overcome that.
I've overcome that for sure.
In a lot of ways.
That was a huge hurdle.
That's right. The friends were slim pickings back then for the old boy.
Okay, you guys can, we're going to chop this up a little bit now that we've done all the particulars. What is it about the sport of wrestling that drew you in? You didn't just wrestle, obviously. You were a golfer, Coach Hurst, but talk about what it is about this whole thing that just draws you like a moth to the flame.
Well, we started, like I said, I was on the first wrestling team in 1964, 65 when we started wrestling with a coach named Craig Campbell, who came from Pitt State, and he was the first line coach that Trenton ever hired specifically to be the line coach back in the day. And he said, I'll come here. He said, I'll come here if you start a wrestling program. And so they said, okay. So he started the program, and I was a sophomore then, and wrestling every bit of 103 and knew nothing, obviously. But he took a team that knew nothing to a team that I think we lost one duel my senior year and had our first state qualifier in 1967 was Dennis Ratliff. So that was sort of started the program on a good note. And then it carried over with I think we won our first district championship in 1971 under Coach Ray Riccono. And then when I came here, they went downhill and they hadn't won a match in I think a year or so and a dual meet. And the first year I was here, we won a dual meet, and you would have thought we'd won the district championship, but we won a dual meet. And it was great. And then probably the thing that got it going the most was the second year I was here in 1976. We had 6 state qualifiers back in the day when if you placed at district, you went to a sectional and you had one match. If you won that match, you were a state qualifier. If you lost, you were done. And we took 7 kids to the sectional, and 6 of them won. So we had 6 state qualifiers in 1 year, before that we'd only had 2 in the entire program. So that just blossomed the thing of emphasizing how great it was to go to state and how important it was to go to state, and that became our goal from that day forward. Every year it was, trying to get to the state tournament, and that's sort of what turned the program around as far as going in that direction. So, and then as far as the sport, it's just like I've told Charlie and several people, it's the greatest single individual sport where it's you're on your own. It's you can't blame anybody but yourself. The rewards are tremendous when you're successful, and they're hard to overcome when you're not. But you have to deal with that, and it's just a one-on-one sport that doesn't matter how strong you are. It doesn't matter how big you are. It doesn't matter how much you weigh. It's just it's all about perseverance and dedication and technique.
Talk about to a casual fan. I mean, you know what it's like at a meet now, a dual meet that you host in Trenton or the big meets you go to. I mean, what do fans need to understand about the passion that's involved in the sport of wrestling? Well,
all you really have to do when you go to a duel is watch Marcia Hurst. I mean, she is, if you want to see passion, she's wrestling every match with our kids is something that I've always noticed. And she's wrestled more matches than either one of us combined because she wrestles every single one. But that's actually what got me into wrestling in the first place is I went to a duel, and my cousin Phil Lowry, he wrestled throughout the heyday of Coach Hurst's career, and I went to a duel, and it was just electric. I mean, the fans, it was packed from the bottom to the top, and it was just the atmosphere that drew me in, and I said, okay, this is something I definitely want to be a part of, and I was probably in 3rd, 4th grade at the time.
I've always said there is no fan that carries the passion of their sport like the wrestling fan, especially wrestling moms and dads who I've seen come to tournaments and bring their crock pots and their coolers and their blankets and pillows because they knew they were going to be there for 9 or 10 hours. They were going to settle in for the day. They were going to root like you can't believe, scream like you can't believe, every minute, every second with their kid on the mat. and it just made for a fun time in the gym when everybody was so rabid for the sport.
One of the things that I think as a casual fan, wrestling, and there's a lot of different wild variants out there. Back in the day, there was pro wrestling, and it was, it was kind of gritty, and people got in vans and drove to Wichita and, and did all those things. It was a little bit closer to the real sport, probably at that time. But now people see all these things that are sort of entertainment wrapped around, wrestling. I mean, this pure sport, it's still there. I mean, it hasn't, talk about how it has or has not changed in the pure sport of wrestling.
Well, it's the oldest sport known to mankind and goes way back. And it's the fact that to me, it's the intensity of it, especially seeing two good kids go at each other and just see the defense and the offense and what impresses me most, especially in college wrestling, is their ability to get out. You think a kid's taken down and he gets on the mat and he comes out of it, they can defend extremely well, and it's just amazing some of the moves they come up with. I see it every once in a while. I'll watch and I'll see a move I've never seen before, and I said, how did a kid come up with that? He just they'll do a cartwheel or something and come around and they're on the bottom. Next thing you know, they're doing a cartwheel or something crazy, and the guy's on his back and they're pinning him. So they're still creating. They're still perfecting technique. Their quickness is unbelievable. And I think it's gotten better and better. The moves that might have worked 20 years ago don't work today. And the counters that might have worked 20 years ago don't work today because they've just improved the technique and they've improved the defense, and it's just gotten better and better.
What have you seen, Charlie? What have you seen change in the world of wrestling, or the ability of kids to master these skills over the time since you were a wrestler?
Yeah, there's a lot. And I think the biggest thing, and I tell our kids this all the time, you've got so much information at the touch of your finger, and you can be watching a national champion demonstrate a move, or an Olympian or a world champion breaking down technique, and it's just they have so much more access to good technique. Whereas when I was in school, we would have to go to camps, and your clinician would be usually a D1 college wrestler, or it was up to the coach at that time.
Has wrestling refereeing kept up with it? We've talked about this in other sports where the age of referees, or maybe some old school referees struggle with things like in basketball, for example. People can make moves that you just couldn't have imagined back in the day when we were kids. That's a travel. Well, it's not a travel so much, So are there same things in wrestling? Has the refereeing changed any over the years?
Well,
he may have something to say. He seems to have a Cheshire cat grin.
Well, I think the fact is the quickness of the kids has gotten so much better, and their moves, and of course, I've seen a lot of changes in wrestling where there were moves that were illegal that are not illegal anymore. That were moves that where they counted a takedown that wasn't a takedown. Well, now it is. They've changed the scoring tremendously in the last few years, and that's going to be really hard on the referees to keep up, especially the new near fall rule. I think that's going to be really tough and probably going to be questioned quite a bit, And of course, the illegal holds are still illegal holds. I don't think that's changed very much, but it's just fact that you get older referees, just like you do in all sports. You get older referees, they don't move as fast, they're not quite as quick, they're maybe on the wrong side of the move. They don't see something that they should see if they were younger, and we have a problem with younger officials coming into the sport, in all sports, but they're having problems with younger officials, taking up the sport and learning, which we need in all sports. And you got guys, 65 years old out there refereeing, and that's gotta affect it.
I would echo exactly what he said. There's been many times where, you've got a guy who's been officiating for years and years, and they were really good officials, and then maybe they're out of position now and just can't quite get to those positions that they were in previously. And it seems like they struggle with the out of bounds line too. And that rule changes from year to year. Used to it was 2 supporting points inbounds, and that was a takedown. And now it's if you've got 1 supporting point inbounds. So that's what I've seen over the years.
Well, I think just like any sport, you're going to have human error in when it comes to officiating, and there's a lot of things that are subjective when it comes to scoring wrestling, just from my view as a fan and working scores tables. And, what is clear to some, well, that's a takedown, is not always clear to the guy on the mat who's calling the match. And so you've seen a lot of frustration, or, even do they have him at the right angle to get the near fall or whatever it may be. And so there's always that. And no matter what sport, one, it's going to depend on the quality of official that you've had on the mat, because I think we've seen that as well. Wrestling especially, it just feels like there's so many different rules and what is a way to score and not score, and even like out of bounds and stuff. So there's a lot of subjectivity to that, to where it really just depends on the view of that official and what their stance is. So I can't imagine being a coach or a wrestler and sometimes having to deal with that type of situation.
Does wrestling sort of have an honor code that kind of holds it away from, we're seeing news about Bramer recently and issues with fan behavior, and that's just one example. I mean, there are lots of those in football, in basketball, in anything, especially things that are in closed arenas where you can hear everything. Is there an honor code? Is there something that holds that passion in place and keeps it moving in the right direction for a wrestling fan?
There may be an honor code, but I've had to throw people out of wrestling duels and matches too. Everybody, just like officiating, carries sport to sport. Somebody's going to get carried away and cross the line at a match or a duel or a tournament, and then you just have to deal with it. But I would say for the most part, the passion is the biggest thing for wrestling fans, and they know what they're watching, and they've watched their kids, and I'm sure we'll get into this later, but they've watched their kids from the youth programs all the way up. So parents and fans have seen it all already by the time they get to high school. So they are knowledgeable, and sometimes too knowledgeable for what's going on, and that creates a little bit of tension. Yeah.
I agree with them on the passion, and parents and dads especially. We've had a few that been kicked out of a few gyms. Not mentioning names tonight, but anyway, because they're used to, maybe when they were kids coaches and they're used to yelling from the sidelines or yelling at the edge of the mat, trying to help the referee too much, and sometimes when they're yelling from the stands, the referee hears it and they don't put up with it anymore, which I agree 100%. They've gotten like little league, like the baseball moms and the soccer moms, that's gotten a lot better, I think, over the years of not putting up with it, and even the parents themselves, I've seen from my grandsons and granddaughter, even the parents themselves will go over and say, hey, we don't do that here.
Yeah. We
don't allow that in this league, and that's gotten a lot better from what I've seen. And then, and you said the passion of the parents, when their son gets pinned or their son loses a match, I mean, they feel it maybe even more than he does, because they're just so involved in it, and that's their son. He's hurting, you just can't help but be emotional over that. And sometimes they blame the referee, because if he called a pin and they didn't think he was pinned, obviously that was the referee's fault, and that's hard to deal with.
Absolutely. Okay. So talk about, as you were young coaches, you're still a young coach, Charlie.
I don't know. I'm borderline.
As you were young coaches, what were the things that you learned? What was the work you put into it, the craft, that you think really helped you get a foothold and really start to see success as a coach?
Well, I wrestled in high school, like say 3 years, and we didn't. And then I went to college and played golf, and then I came back here. I coached football in 3 years in a little town called Potosi, and then came back here and started coaching wrestling. And I didn't, I'll be honest with you, I was terrible. I didn't know squat, but I thought I knew enough to get them in shape, and I knew enough to show them a few moves, and I thought, I don't know enough, I need to get better at this. So I started going to camps, and I started going to clinics, and went to some great clinics, with Dan Gable. Went to clinics with Dan Gable and listened to everything he had to say, and then went to University of Missouri and with their coaches, and I knew that I had to get better. And then we started taking kids to camps back in the day, which was even better to take your kid to the University of Missouri or to take it to a USA wrestling camp, which we did. And that's helped tremendously. And I had to learn, and I got better. And we learned about training. We learned about technique. We learned about getting in shape. We learned about how to take care of yourself. All those things. You just tried to soak up everything you could from these people that were the best. I went to some coaches that were the best ever, Dan Gable.
I had an 8th grade teacher, Dennis Augustine. He was an Iowa State wrestler. He wrestled with Chris Taylor, Olympian, and he was a big guy. And this was back in the day of that punishment still occurred. And he would get a look on his face when the teachers would come and ask him to take care of a student that I always remember. And we would be as quiet as possible so we could hear the result of that. But he was just a fabulous guy and just an amazing guy, and really kind of opened up that world to me of what was going on in Iowa at that time, at Iowa State and Iowa in the 70s, and how this sport was building, because Dan Gable was a huge name, but there were other people that during the Olympics caught your attention. It was just amazing, and it was kind of a Midwestern sport. It just seemed to have a lot of pull in the Oklahoma, Iowa area particularly. What were you seeing when you were a youth wrestler and growing into it?
I was just so fortunate because I had great youth coaches. I had Kyle Russell was our youth coach back then, and then Coach Hurst, and then Coach Hill. So I had just really good mentors and great examples of how to structure a practice and what to focus on and what not to focus on. And so I feel like I was kind of cheating when I got into it, just because I just had that experience with Coach Hurst and Coach Hill to go off of. And Coach Hill, he would tell me stories about, he coached, I think, at St. Genevieve before Trenton. And he told stories about, he came in as an assistant, and he was telling me how their head coach ran their practice. And basically it consisted of jogging the entire practice while two guys, they had enough wrestling mat for two guys to drill, but they would just wrestle live the whole time. And then they would rotate throughout the run. And he said, that's probably not the best way to do it.
Seems optimal. Yeah. Yeah.
Who are the people that you had to climb over before you began that run? I mean, what kicked off that run in the 80s? And who were the rivals?
Well,
I mean, Trenton has natural rivals in most sports. People know in football with Chillicothe and all those stories, and Brookfield, and in basketball with other entities. Who were the rivals in wrestling?
Well, when he first started, it was Maryville probably was the best team in the area. And they were, they'd won a couple of state championships back when it first went to 2 classes, and in 71, I think. And then they, and of course, we had some great dual meets with Chillicothe and over the years, and we ended up beating them a lot more often than they beat us, which was wonderful. And then,
Wow.
That is wonderful.
and we wrestled Marshall, who was good, Moberly, Marshall won a couple state championships back in the late 70s, and Brookfield won a state championship in the 80s. They've always been really good in wrestling. So those are some of our big competitors. And then when we got on a roll with the districts and won 12 in a row or whatever it was, we pretty much dominated this area at that time. And then our next opponents, would be at the state tournament and trying to beat them, which was, of course, always Elk Grove and Pleasant Hill and Richmond and MRVC schools. That's who we lost to 2 years in a row. And, of course, they were tough. And so that became the people we had to beat to be the best.
It's kind of a theme, too, because I know you've had some wrestlers that had one guy in their way for a state championship. They would be state champions had they merely been in one different year. But they had the same guy, and they might see him 3 times, 4 times a year. Talk about that, either one of you.
Well, yeah, I've had that happen several times, and it is just quite a hurdle to get over. And it's a lot of that is mental too. I mean, if you've got, and I look back through the years, and Hunter McAtee, and he was a 2-time finalist for me, and his first His first finals match was against, ended up being a 4-time state champion from Palmyra. And then his second time ended up being a 3-time state champion from Butler, Missouri. And so that's a tough hurdle to get over when you're facing guys that are that dominant. I mean,
we went to I remember a state tournament, to throw one out there too. Kinnison, did he get second 3 years in a row?
yes, he did.
Yeah. So those happen, and they are emotional because you are trying to clear that final hurdle and it doesn't work out, but they're working they're giving it their all, working their butts off, and it sometimes just doesn't happen.
Well, and I think that's a prime example too, because 2 of those that kid was a 4-time state champion, and then one of them was a kid that Kinnison was back and forth with. It was a kid out of Brookfield,
yeah.
and then just caught him at the wrong time at state. But yeah, I think you've seen that a lot historically. What's impressive about our program, because I've done some looking back over the years of different things, of that impressive run that we had, that Coach Hurst had of state champions. Again, there were so many of those guys too that were second place finishers, and he had coached so many third place finishers and guys who were going down and getting medals, which is in an individual sport, obviously your pinnacle is winning a state championship, but man, what an impressive feat it is to go and win a state medal in any sport. And the amount of state medals we have from the wrestling room of Trenton High School is really quite impressive. And especially if you look, kind of what Coach Hurst and Coach Hill's teams faced that was back when we were Class 1A, 2A, and they were seeing there was 3 classes in the state of Missouri. Since then, we've went to 4. But what I've kind of seen as a swing too is you've also seen a lot of these private schools pop up over the years. And so as Charlie's taken over and toward the end of Bill Hill's, they weren't necessarily going against some of those Oak Groves and Platte counties and things like that anymore. But all of a sudden, Whitfields were popping up, and the one out of Columbia, and whatever. There's these private schools that have now popped up that are pulling these kids out from the city, and it's like you're facing these city schools. So wrestling is just kind of that beast that's seen. There's always tough competition, no matter what.
So I've been out of it for a couple of years on the AD side, but does wrestling use the same point system now as some of the other sports, where if you are successful as a team, say Whitfield wins a couple state championships, they might bump up a class from their enrollment? That's happening in wrestling too,
Yes,
correct? Yes.
How many years?
From Class 1 to Class 3 because of that has happened. That's affected it. St. Pius is another one that was in our class, and how they got there, I don't know. But I think another thing that on this subject is what you've got to realize is these kids that are living in the city, they've got tremendous advantage. I mean, they wrestle freestyle, they wrestle, they have open gyms, they go to the cadet wrestling in North Dakota. And I mean, they wrestle nationally. I mean, they're wrestling 150 matches a year. We're out here 90 miles from Kansas City, and that's just, we don't have that advantage to benefit from that like they do. And you see the state champions, and that's the ones that are state champions. The kids that have been doing it all year, or they've been doing it, and they've been going to Fargo to get nationals. And I mean, they're placing 5th in the nation, and they think winning state championship in Missouri is like no big deal.
Yeah.
It just
kind of puts it in perspective.
Yeah.
There's a real similarity between that and how it parallels golf and tennis too, to where such the advantage for the schools in Kansas City that are private, have private coaches, do things all year round. And then you're a Trenton kid and you get to state and you've got to face a Whitfield, a John Burroughs, another school that is just basically pumping these state medalists out like a factory, and it gets really, really tough. So I'm glad the multiplier maybe is working a little bit, an improvement from the straight 1.35 multiplier that they used to have.
Yeah, I believe Whitfield's still quite successful in Class 3. Hasn't really slowed them down much.
They found a way, right?
Yeah, they did. In fact, how many years ago was that they put it in for wrestling? Because Whitfield...
It's only been about 3, I think.
That's what I thought, yeah.
Well, and Midbuck had to jump up as well a few years back, if I remember right.
Yeah, but I think theirs was enrollment.
Was theirs enrollment?
Yeah, theirs was enrollment.
Because that only applies to the private schools.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Championship points, they call it. Championship points only applies to private schools.
Yeah. And is that the same way in the other ones as well?
Yeah, I think it took place of the 1.35 population multiplier.
It did.
Right, yeah.
Makes sense.
I know Father Tolton
Yeah,
Columbia.
yeah, that's who I was thinking of.
They
Yeah.
moved up last year.
Yep.
And they've had 2 or 3 kids wrestle for Mizzou. Three kids.
And they've had several 4-time state champions
Mhm.
over the years. One of them's wrestling for Oklahoma State.
Yep.
And I'm not going to hijack this conversation, but I'll point out that in this particular week, Ohio State won the National Football Championship with a $20 million roster. So money in most sports carries so much weight.
You mean roster or payroll?
Yeah,
Payroll.
right,
Payroll.
that's right.
Yeah. Kind of like SMU back in the day that they got in trouble for. And in the NFL, you're lucky because how could the Chiefs possibly be doing what they're doing if that system wasn't set up so it was a little more fair for competition, because we're in the 26th largest market out of 32 teams. And yet we have a dominant team because the rules allow that to take place. So we're blessed with that, but it is a fact that we deal with. But it's also makes it pretty sweet when those guys do break through and accomplish things at that level, maybe even surprise themselves.
Right. Well, when we've had state champions, they were pretty much a class by themselves. I don't think we've had any state champions that came out of nowhere. I mean, they were probably ranked number 1 all year, and they were by far the best wrestler. I mean, we've had 3 Wrestler of the Year awards, 2 by Karson Hill and 1 by Dan Duncan, where they were the wrestlers of the entire state tournament. So that speaks for itself that, that they were the best of the best,
I was doing some research and I ran across some of Carson's statistics and just happened to be a wrestler named Jaden Cox
Yeah.
at the same time.
Yeah.
I mean, he had more takedowns than Jaden Cox, who has won an Olympic medal.
Yeah.
And
He had more takedowns than everybody.
Yeah,
Anybody.
In the nation.
Ever.
Yeah.
exactly. And it's just when you juxtapose it with somebody that we know, that we have all seen on TV
Yeah.
many times,
Yeah.
winning national championships, going to the Olympics, winning world championships. Wow. Just something else.
What was kind of funny about that is Karson, he kind of kept his number a secret, and he kept it a secret the best he could. I think people figured out that, hey, this kid might have a lot of takedowns. This is like his 40th win by tech fall this season, but he kept it a secret, and I think he kind of knew that Jaden Cox was going for the same record that year, and I don't know at what point Jaden figured out that he didn't actually hold that record, but it may have been after the state.
Probably when it was
finals.
over.
I think it was when
okay.
it was over.
This is so much fun. I've always wondered this, so now's a great time. Maybe not. So who was in the room when it was decided that Karson should do this? Like, he's going to win the state title. That's probably in the bag. He's good enough. What can we do to step it up one more? Let's go for the takedown record. Was that a coach/dad Karson decision? Were some of you guys in the room when that happened, or did it go like 3/4 of the way into the year thinking, oh, we're close? I don't think it was, because I remember going to a match early and I turned to somebody, might have been Daniel. I said, what's going on? I mean, this is an obvious, he's taking him down, letting him go, taking him down, letting him, he's playing with this guy who's really good. And he has 7 takedowns already in this. And then someone finally told me, well, bigger things on the horizon are coming. And I'm like, well, wow, who decides that? I was always been curious. So what's the proper answer, Coach?
This is 100% Karson. I don't think Bill had it anywhere on his radar. And in fact, Bill was, I think, just kind of annoyed by it. Like, oh, Karson, he's going for this he wants this takedown record. But it was totally Karson that had that idea and went for it.
I didn't know anything about. I knew what was going on. I talked to Bill later in the season, and he sort of keep this under your hat, but this is what's going on. And of course, I never said anything to anybody at the time, so
it was impressive. That's for sure to watch.
It's an amazing accomplishment. I mean,
incredible,
and that he knew it and knew what he needed to do, and that he could accomplish it.
Well, what was amazing about Karson Hill, if you lined up athletes in an identification thing, and said, okay, which one's the best athlete and the biggest and the most amazing wrestler, you would never pick Karson Hill out of that lineup.
No,
he just looked like a great kid, and he wasn't muscular, but his technique was as good as anybody I've ever seen, and he could react and he could counter, and he knew what he was doing, and the kids. He was just amazing. I mean,
he was
by far the best Trenton wrestler, obviously, I've ever seen, and there have been a bunch of good ones. So,
Talk about just pick somebody out that maybe was in that middle tier, but all of a sudden was threatening and maybe either got a medal or got very close to it, just got the most, squeezed the most out of their abilities. And
I what comes to mind, and not only wrestling, but his entire career, Greg Stahl. When Greg Stahl started wrestling, he was not very good. I'm not sure he won a match his freshman year, and then he just fell in love with the sport. He learned how to take people down. He got a great single leg. Placed at state twice, his junior and senior year, and then went on to coach, and then went on to be, assistant executive director of Missouri Activity Association, in charge of the state of Missouri's wrestling tournament. So there's a kid that came out of nowhere and turned it into a career, and did a great job at everything he did from then on. So, and
we love that here. I mean, we talk about that a lot, those kind of stories where somebody just caught the bug and they just kept working at it, and all of a sudden they have some success, and then they get some reward from that, and then doors open up for them, and they turn it into something that's a lifelong passion.
And in wrestling, I think, and Charlie's, as you see a kid, that you just see a kid that all of a sudden he's figured it out. That he's finally learned how to take somebody down. He's learned how to set somebody up. He's learned how to, it's just clicking. You can just, sometimes you go to a match and you haven't seen it in him. All of a sudden he wrestles somebody pretty good, and he's successful with what he's doing. And then it just like a switch goes off, and he just, from then on, he's tough,
Yeah. I've actually got two. First one, Thomas Mack. We called him the baby giraffe his freshman year, and he would not be mad at me for saying that, because we said it all the time. But he was uncoordinated. He lost so many matches his freshman, sophomore, junior, and even into his senior year. But he really, like Coach Hurst said, you see it click, and you see some things that are starting to line up. And he was beating kids that looked like they were chipped from stone, and that was a pretty good indicator that he was on the right track. And he made the state finals that year after, I think he qualified as a junior, no medal. And he was the happiest state finalist in the building, placed second. And I guarantee you every other second place kid, of course he wanted to win it, but he was up against a 4-time or a 3-time state champion, maybe a 4-timer from South Harrison. So he would be my first one. And then Bryce Gibbler would be my second one. There's a kid who I watched him every day at practice, and he was in a tough practice room too. And he would just get beat on every single day. And then we would go to competition. He would get beat every single match his freshman year. Sophomore year, he won a couple of matches. And even into his senior year, he was about a 500 wrestler until that tournament before the district tournament. And then he started beating a couple of kids that had beaten him. You could just see the light bulb click on, and it was the best feeling ever. And so he wins districts. And that was the COVID year. So we did districts, and we went back to a sectional after that, and he wins that and set him up on the state bracket just perfect. And he placed third, and he had that one still gets me.
That's good. That's good. What's the culture that lets a kid take their beating as a freshman? You know what the culture is now. It's like, I should be good enough. I'm better than that guy. I should start in a lot of sports. Or the parent is pumping them full of that kind of information. What's the culture in wrestling in Trenton that in the room that keeps those guys working?
Well, I think number one, those are exceptions to the rule.
They are.
I mean, if most kids are not going to get beat, like if they start kids wrestling and they're not successful, or if they start any sport and they're not very good, and they don't pay the price like maybe they did. You were JV, you were a freshman, you didn't play, you sat on the bench in basketball, you waited your turn. They don't want to do that anymore. I mean, and then if they get beat, even if they go from kids wrestling to high school and they're not winning, and maybe they were winning in kids, they don't want to go through that again. Most of them don't. So it's rare to have a kid that just sticks with it. He either loves the sport or loves the atmosphere or loves these fellow wrestlers or maybe loves the coach, whatever, that makes him want to stick with it. And he just maybe loves the fact that I'm a better person because I'm doing this. I'm getting myself in shape. I'm getting myself mentally prepared for maybe something bigger in life because, like Dan Gable always said, once you've wrestled, everything else in life is easy. And of course, was his mentality, that's how much he put into wrestling. And there's a lot of truth to that if you stick with it. If you've wrestled for 4 years, you have learned so much about mental toughness and so much about, persevering and so much about sticking with something, even when you're not being successful and waiting your turn to be successful.
Yeah, and even in the practice room, everything in wrestling is earned. And I mean, you earn your spot, you earn everything. And going in as a freshman, getting beat on by seniors that maybe are close to your weight, I mean, that is just a common theme in a good wrestling room anyway. And you have to sit those kids down and have that discussion with them, exactly like Coach Hurst just said. The bigger picture is it's going to make you more resilient. You're going to be gritty. You're going to have life skills to put in your tool belt for a long time. And I think that's key. And some kids buy into that, and sometimes it goes in one ear and out the other, and they're like, "Oh, I'm done with this."
Well, as we might have suspected, we have a little more information, a little more talk than will fit in one episode. I also didn't realize there would be so much math. This is the point for you oldsters that you might have had to turn over the 8-track tape. In this case, you're just going to have to wait a week. So next week, you've got another segment to look forward to of this episode from Bulldog Strong, 50 years of Trenton Bulldog Wrestling, and some great stories. Until then, thank you for listening to Show Me Sports Legacies.